the BBC News at 10 o'clock with Sophie Rayworth.
Tonight at 10, the UK is closing all travel corridors from Monday amid fears about new variants of coronavirus. Anyone arriving in the UK must show a negative test and will also have to self-isolate for up to 10 days. More than 37,000 people are now in hospital with COVID in the UK. A quarter of them are under the age of 55.
In spite of all the efforts of our doctors and nurses and our medical staff, we're now seeing cancer treatments sadly postponed, ambulances queuing, and intensive care units are spilling over into adjacent wards.
There is progress, though. More than 3.2 million people have already been vaccinated. Also tonight, hope for tens of thousands of small businesses as the Supreme Court rules that insurance firms must issue payouts for losses suffered during the first lockdown. British meat exporters say new customs systems post-Brexit are not fit for purpose, with perishable goods delayed for hours because of extra checks and paperwork. And the Premier League boss warns footballers to tone down celebration.
Up in sport on BBC News, Joe Root makes good on his promise to deliver the big scores. The England captain moves to 168 not out as England dominate the first test against Sri Lanka.
Good evening. The UK is closing all its travel corridors from Monday as concerns grow about new variants of the coronavirus. Anyone arriving in the UK will have to present a negative test and will still have to self-isolate for up to 10 days. The new border restrictions will be reviewed in a month's time. It comes as the Prime Minister urged people to stay at home this weekend, with hospitals across the UK under extraordinary pressure. More than 37,000 people are currently being treated for coronavirus, a record number, with the peak not expected for another 10 days in most places. A quarter of the patients are under the age of 55. Tonight, hospitals in Nottingham and Newcastle, amongst others, are standing ready to accept intensive care patients from London to try to ease the pressure on the worst-hit areas. But the Prime Minister said there was hope, with more than 3.2 million people already vaccinated in the UK. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
This hospital was one of the first to fill up with seriously ill COVID patients last March. Now the same thing's happening again, only more so. Like many other hospitals in the southeast of England, Northwick Park is under severe strain.
There are more patients now than there were in March and April and May. And if those numbers continue, then it doesn't matter how good we are at looking after COVID, we'll just run out of beds.
Because of pressure on critical care units like that, hospitals in Nottingham have been asked to take COVID patients from London and the southeast, and Newcastle is also set to receive patients from further south, even London. Trust leaders say hospitals around England have been asked to help by boosting capacity.
We know we now are moving patients, a small number of patients, from London to other parts of the country because London's critical care capacity is very, very full. That's not something we would normally want to do, but I hope in one sense it's a reassuring sign of how far the NHS will go to treat every single patient who needs care.
Some hospitals in London and the southeast of England are so stretched that patients are having to be moved hundreds of miles for treatment. Does this not suggest that not enough was done by the government to prepare the NHS for the second wave?
A huge amount was done to prepare the NHS for, and has continuously for the last year, and actually even in London, where the situation has been toughest, the London NHS has been under huge pressure, but they really have been coping magnificently.
A social media site has brought together impressions from the NHS front line. One doctor said, as he died in the hospital bed all alone, I held his hand, saying everything was going to be okay. I realise now that me saying those things was more for me than for him. Another entry said, I became an A&E nurse because I feel like we make a big difference to our patients, but with this virus we don't get that. Another doctor reported, my grandparents both died of COVID 5 days apart in different hospitals. Seeing all this loss and suffering at work is so much harder when I've been on the other side of it as well. Admissions to hospitals like this one in Kettering involve patients who got the virus a couple of weeks before. As for new cases, there are tentative signs of a change of direction. Recent case numbers show in the last week Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland have all seen case numbers fall. It's the same in England, with more cases in a bigger population, including dips in hotspots like London. But in some council areas like Knowsley, Halton and the Isle of Wight, there have been increases. Officials believe the peak of infections may have passed in some areas, but not hospital admissions.
It takes a while between people first getting infected to getting ill enough to go to hospital. So that peak will be a bit later in every area of the country, a bit later than the peak of infections. And then the peak of deaths, unfortunately, is a bit later still. So the peak of deaths, I fear, is in the future.
A decisive reversal of those trends may only come once there have been widespread vaccinations. But progress is being made, with the daily total now hitting 300,000 for the first time. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
And you can see a full report from Northwick Park Hospital on Newsnight tonight on BBC Two at 10:30. So the UK's borders are being tightened from Monday morning, but for how long and what impact will it have? Here's our transport correspondent, Caroline Davis.
While most of us are being told to stay at home, today saw another announcement about international travel. Yesterday, passengers from South America and Portugal were banned from travelling to the UK to stop the spread of a new COVID variant from Brazil. Today, the Prime Minister announced another measure to tighten up travel.
To protect us against the risk of as yet unidentified new strains, we will also temporarily close all travel corridors from 0400 hours on Monday.
Today's announcement is not a travel ban, it's about quarantine. Combined with earlier policies, it now means from Monday, anyone travelling to the UK will have to show they have a negative COVID test less than 72 hours before they depart. When they arrive, they must now quarantine for 10 days, no matter where they've flown from in the world, or pay for a COVID test on the 5th day. If it's negative, they can leave quarantine early. As well as airports, the policy applies to the Eurostar and seaports, but won't apply to anyone travelling within the UK or Ireland, or to some jobs like hauliers. The government say that this step is now needed because it's difficult to predict where new variants might come from. Passenger flights are already significantly down. Heathrow Airport handled just over 1 million passengers in December, down nearly 83% on last year. There's been criticism that this policy would have been more effective if it had been introduced earlier.
Lots of the British public will say, look, we're really worried about the variant in other countries. Other countries have taken measures. We were slow to it. And they will be wondering why this didn't happen sooner and why the delay now till Monday.
During the summer, the travel industry saw travel corridors as a lifeline. It kept people going on holiday. Today, many say they support the suspension so long as travel corridors can come back later this year.
If we're going to have an aviation sector coming out of this, we need to open up in the summer. We look forward to having conversations with the government about that. But for the here and now, we are absolutely clear that we will support the government.
This is one of many travel policies the government have introduced. The question now is whether it will make a significant difference in keeping the country safe. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, is in Westminster. Significant changes to the borders almost a year after the pandemic began. So why now?
Yeah, I mean, the government has been criticised for not being as strict as other countries. What they've done is to use quarantine as the main tool. Their point being that if someone comes into the country, if they're not going out, then they're not spreading it. And that's the approach they've taken. Now, the logic for doing it now is because they say of these new variants, we've been very good at isolating them and finding them once here. Of course, they want to now try and find them before they get here, and they can't be sure where they are coming from. Now, one minister described all this as a safety first approach. They say they don't want to fall at the last hurdle. So what is going to get us over that hurdle? Well, it is, of course, the vaccination programme. And here there has been some remarkable progress. We've heard there are over 3 million people in the UK now vaccinated, and they don't want to have that good work and progress undermined by new variants coming in. So some good news amid some still bad news on deaths and hospitalisations.
Vicky Young in Westminster, thank you. The growth in the number of confirmed cases has slowed. The latest government figures show there were 55,761 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, the first time it has crept above 50,000 this week, but numbers are still almost 14% down on this time last week. On average, the number of new cases reported per day in the last week is 51,221. Hospitals have had an average of 35,147 COVID-19 inpatients. 1,280 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average, in the past week, 1,066 deaths were announced every day. The total number of deaths so far across the UK is 87,295. And an update on the UK's programme of mass vaccinations. More than 316,000 people have had their first dose of one of the 3 approved COVID-19 vaccines in the latest 24-hour period, taking the overall number of people who've had at least one jab to more than 3.2 million. Knowsley on Merseyside has the highest rate of coronavirus cases in England. In the last 3 weeks alone, the number of new infections has been doubling on average every week. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has been to Knowsley to find out why case numbers just keep rising.
The messages are clear. They're heard and seen.
Stay safe. Thank you. Stay safe. Okay. Stay safe. Thank you.
From asymptomatic testing to the specialist COVID prevention officers.
Yeah. I'm part of the COVID team. Okay. You've probably seen us wandering around the market. Yeah.
But despite this, in Knowsley, COVID cases have surged. And not all lockdowns are equal.
Are you hearing that more and more people have got COVID?
Yes, most definitely. It's every other person saying, oh, such and such a body's got it and such a body's got it. You know, it's scary.
Amanda has to work. Bills and rent need to be paid.
I wake up through the night, so it's just stressful. It's just what's tomorrow going to bring, you know. I'm just about covering my bills and there's no spare cash.
Knowsley is one of the most deprived parts of England.
It's been an absolute perfect storm.
The public health director here believes that inequality is fueling COVID cases.
We have a low-wage economy. We have low car ownership, so people just have no choice other than to travel. People have no choice other than to go out to work. You know, a lot of people living within our communities have uncertainty around their jobs, and they may fear that actually if they take the precautions that they're supposed to do and self-isolate, they may not get money coming in.
I live on the 13th floor, and I think I'm safe up there, because it's down here.
We spoke to Peter during the last wave in Knowsley. Since then, 2 family members have died with COVID.
I'm keeping myself safe. I'm keeping my distance. And if someone's going to come close to me, I say, whoa, whoa, and I'll back off.
What has COVID done to your family, your extended family?
Oh, it's decimated it. Decimated it.
A single parent, he works on food production lines across the northwest.
Well, if you don't work, you can't play. And playing is eating. It's surviving. It's clothes on your back, food on the table. So if you don't do that, you're going to struggle. You are going to struggle.
Do you worry when you go back home to your daughter?
Of course. I'm scared to go anywhere near her.
On average, COVID cases in Knowsley have doubled every week for 3 weeks.
All I want to do is get my needle. The government promised.
For vulnerable people like Edward, there's a sense of helplessness.
I had long COVID. I had it for 10 weeks in April.
You've had COVID?
Yeah, I've been in Royal twice. But the new COVID, there's lots of people catching it.
How does Knowsley get out of this situation?
By following the rules and getting the injection. That's the only way.
The vaccine?
The vaccine, yes.
After 3 national lockdowns, months of restrictions, that is the hope so many here are relying on. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Knowsley.
Ever since the new variant of COVID emerged in the UK, there have been questions about its impact on children and whether they are more likely to get it or help spread it. Our science correspondent Rebecca Morell reports.
Children have been one of the pandemic's biggest puzzles, with the young less likely to get the virus than adults. But does the arrival of the new variant change this? And is it affecting children more? Initial data was analysed for all ages and something stood out. This red bar for 10 to 19-year-olds suggested the new variant was particularly infectious for this group compared with the old one in blue. But this was during November's lockdown when much was closed apart from schools, and this may explain that bump. The latest evidence shows the new variant is 50% more infectious, but not especially for children. It's just that it's better at infecting everyone across every age group. Is the new variant different for younger and older children? Nurseries are still open in England and Wales, and scientists think the youngest are less likely to catch the variant and pass it on than older kids.
We know that in old variants, children less than 10 were less susceptible, but susceptibility and transmissibility increased by age, especially over the age of 15. Transmission dynamics are almost similar to adults.
Does the new variant make kids more ill? The latest evidence suggests that it isn't causing more severe disease in the young. Children can need hospital treatment, but they still make up a tiny proportion of cases overall.
We are seeing slightly more children because there's more people being infected, but we're not seeing children being disproportionately affected, and we're certainly not seeing wards full of children with COVID.
With classrooms empty, schools are part of the UK's lockdown. But this isn't about risks to children, it's about controlling the spread of the virus. The science of the variant is fast moving, and researchers will continue to monitor its impact on the young. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
There have now been more than 2 million COVID-19 related deaths around the globe since the disease first emerged a year ago. The United States remains the worst affected country in terms of total deaths, with almost 390,000 deaths, followed by Brazil, India, Mexico, and then the United Kingdom. Some EU nations are receiving fewer than expected doses of one of the coronavirus vaccines as the US pharmaceutical firm Pfizer slows shipments. The company has warned of delays in delivering it from its Belgian plant, but Pfizer-BioNTech says it will be boosting production in the long term. 6 European Union member states have described the reduced shipments as unacceptable. Stricter rules are to be introduced for retailers, including supermarkets in Wales, amid concerns about safety for customers and staff. From early next week, shops will have to display social distancing signs, provide sanitizer for hands and trolleys, and limit customer numbers by law. The Supreme Court has paved the way for tens of thousands of small businesses to receive insurance payouts for the losses they have sustained during the pandemic. The case was brought by the Financial Conduct Authority and a group of firms whose insurers had refused to issue payments on their business interruption policies. The ruling could prove a lifeline for companies struggling to stay afloat. Our business correspondent, Kevin Peachy, reports.
A patisserie, a holiday cottage, a photography studio and a skin clinic. Varied small businesses, but with owners united in fury when their insurance claims for lost earnings in lockdown were turned down. Now they and tens of thousands of other small firms have been given hope of a payout. Running a hair salon in central London, James is one of them.
It will enable our business to keep going. We've got debts to pay down, we've got employees that we're responsible for, so being able to get through this difficult final phase of the pandemic, this BI payout would mean the world to that.
Insurers had argued many business interruption policies were never intended for such unprecedented restrictions in a pandemic, but they agreed with regulators to a legal case to test various policy wordings. Now, Supreme Court judges have sided broadly with the policyholders, the small businesses, in a ruling that means many, but not all, will be compensated.
Each claim has to be assessed individually, that's the law, and that's the regulatory requirement. But insurers will work very closely with brokers, with policyholders and others to get this process moving as quickly as possible. And in many cases, those policyholders have already lodged the details of their claims and supplied much of the information that's needed.
Payouts of hundreds of millions of pounds will help many small firms to stay afloat, but putting their trust in insurers back on an even keel may take longer. Kevin Peachy, BBC News.
British meat exporters say new customs systems post-Brexit are not fit for purpose. Perishable goods are being delayed for hours, sometimes days, because of extra customs checks and additional paperwork. The new border rules were introduced 2 weeks ago at the end of the Brexit transition period. The UK exports £15 billion worth of food and drink to the EU every year. A third of it is perishable meat, fish and fresh produce. The trade body says meat exports to the EU are currently at 25% of their normal volumes for this time of year. Our business editor Simon Jack's report begins at a meat processing factory in Shropshire.
UK lamb is highly prized. At this Shropshire-based abattoir, 70% gets exported to the EU. It's an export-driven success story. But the well-oiled machine that gets it there has a new spanner in it. Paperwork that used to take 15 minutes is now taking hours and also requires vet certificates not needed before.
So we've been having sleepless nights, we've been taking calls from the hauliers, from the agents, early hours of the morning. It has been a huge, steep learning curve, and we see some of these problems will remain even once we get to the new normal level. For fresh quality product trading on a daily basis, this system is not fit for purpose and it needs to be looked at urgently.
Risland's products are still getting through, but delays are shortening shelf life, making his customers frustrated and forcing them to consider other options.
I feel very upset about this situation. We're thinking to buy some lambs in Spain. So we have some of our competitors who have ordered their lambs in Ireland instead of UK.
Between the seller and the buyer are the hauliers. No one is feeling more frustrated than Pete White.
We travel all over Western Europe every single week. And last week for me was probably the worst, most difficult week I've had in this job in 20 years. We have lost hundreds of hours, dozens of days already with our trucks that are waiting unnecessarily.
Behind us here, we're looking at the new border control posts that Customs have set up.
Near the mouth of the Eurotunnel in Kent, Customs expert Stephen Cock says problems on the way out mean problems on the way in.
We have a situation where Border Force's car park is full, the roads are heavily congested, they're turning lorries back now. Exports are grinding to a halt at the moment. If you've got a lorry that is going to get stuck on its way out, then if you're the haulier, why would you want to bring it in the first place? So it will snarl everything up, import and export.
It has been a pretty miserable time for hauliers, for their drivers and for their commercial customers. And remember, the problems we've seen are at a time when the port's operating at a fraction of their normal volume. Those volumes are expected to increase. And while let's hope that any potential chaos will be short-lived, it seems clear that additional cost, additional complexity on trading with our biggest trading partner are here to stay.
After decades of friction-free trade, there was bound to be disruption. The government says it's working hard with business to get to what it describes as a new normal in cross-channel trade. Simon Jack, BBC News.
The economic impact of lockdown measures across the UK in November has become clearer, with the latest official figures showing the economy shrank by 2.6% during that month. The decline in gross domestic product, or the sum of value of goods and services produced in the economy, came after 6 months of growth. Pubs, hairdressers and others in the service sector were particularly badly hit, but some manufacturing and construction activity improved. The Chancellor says the figures show things will get harder before they get better, but that with the vaccine rollout and economic support measures, there are reasons to be hopeful. Police investigations have been compromised by an error which led to more than 200,000 files being wrongly deleted from the police national computer. The missing items include arrest records, DNA and fingerprints. It's resulted in near misses during serious crime investigations where the computer system hadn't generated potentially crucial information, according to the National Police Chiefs Council. Official figures show there was a significant increase in the number of children in England suffering serious harm between April and September of last year, the period which included the first lockdown. The data has been compiled by the Department for Education from local authority reports on serious harm. Well, our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan is with me now, and it is a big rise in a short space of time.
Indeed, well, these figures are published every 6 months, which means that we can compare this period for 2020 with the same 6-month period between April and September of 2019. Now, if we do that, we see that the number of children's deaths increased to 119. That's up from 89. And the incidence of serious harm, that might be abuse or exploitation, that increased to 153 from 132. Now, the reports also say that most of the harm actually occurred to children living at home rather than, say, in a care home. And the largest increase in incidents were against children either under the age of 1 or over the age of 16. Now, as you said, the dates cover a period longer than the first lockdown, but you remember at the time there were concerns that the closure of schools in particular meant that teachers and social workers didn't have access to vulnerable children, and they are the professionals most likely to spot neglect and abuse. Now, the Children's Society tonight, which describe these figures as shocking, are saying during this lockdown it's really important that schools and social care work together to ensure that vulnerable children have access to a teacher or to some other professional. For their part, the government are saying they're still trying to understand the impact of the pandemic, but that they have spent thousands of pounds, invested thousands of pounds in charities who work with families and vulnerable children.
Michael Buchanan, thank you. Uganda's President Museveni has a clear lead after yesterday's election, with around half the ballots counted. But his main challenger, Bobi Wine, has dismissed the poll as a complete sham. 76-year-old Museveni is the only president most Ugandans have ever known, having been in power for 35 years. Partial results show 38-year-old pop star turned politician Bobi Wine trailing the incumbent, but he says the election saw the worst vote rigging in Uganda's history. A countrywide internet shutdown, which began on Wednesday, is still in place. From Kampala, our Africa correspondent Catherine Berahanga reports.
One of my gardeners came and informed me that we were surrounded.
He calls himself the hope of a new generation. But tonight, Bobi Wine finds himself surrounded in his home. Security forces patrol the area, reminding him of the power of the government he once removed. The army says it's for his own protection. Bobi Wine rejects Thursday's presidential elections. He told the BBC he believes he is the clear winner.
I'm not calling myself a president-elect yet. I am saying the results that are being communicated by the Electoral Commission are fake, they are fraudulent, they are not a representation of what happened, of what the people said, therefore we reject them.
But Uganda's Electoral Commission says Bobi Wine needs to present evidence of his allegations. Results they have released so far show the incumbent, President Yoweri Museveni, has taken a decisive and early lead. The 76-year-old, who is seeking a 6th term, has controlled Uganda for 3 decades and is in charge of the army and police. He had this warning for his rivals.
I congratulate all those who have voted. Let the counting be peaceful. Nobody should try to bring violence.
The real power here is still in the hands of the old guard, business leaders, politicians, and army generals. They want to maintain the status quo for economic stability. But they will have to deal with a growing chorus of young people who believe the state has failed them and want jobs, better education, and healthcare.
There is anxiety here over whether the final results will be accepted. Many of Bobi Wine's supporters stayed back to watch the vote count. Even though he is challenging the process, Bobi Wine has so far stopped short of calling his supporters out onto the streets. Catherine Berahanga, BBC News, Kampala.
In cricket, captain Joe Root scored his first Test century for over a year as England tightened their grip on the first Test against Sri Lanka in Galle. Root reached 168 not out on a rain-affected day 2. His stand of 173 with Dan Lawrence helped the tourists to 320 for 4, a lead of 185. The head of the Premier League has warned players to set a good example and minimise unnecessary close contact on the pitch. Richard Masters was speaking at the end of a week when footballers repeatedly ignored guidelines about goal celebrations. Our sports editor, Dan Roan, reports.
Football's continuation during this lockdown has been something for the sport to celebrate, but the game's now gripped by a row over players flouting controversial new rules limiting close contact. And today,
just their behaviours on the pitch and goal celebrations and in and around the beginning and end of matches, we're asking them to adjust their behaviour, and I think they understand why. You've got to follow the rules and you've got to set a good example. We get the optics, which is why we see ourselves in a privileged position.
Ministers have made it clear they expect players to respect the so-called no-hug rule at a time of national crisis or risk having the season suspended. But this week it's been repeatedly ignored.
Why is it taking so much to get the message across, do you think?
Well, it's a very recent adjustment, and we're making these requests and trying to get these messages across in pretty quick order. And I think it's going to take time to adjust to the situation. So we need a bit of time to get it right.
And if players refuse or fail to do that, managers don't encourage them to do so, what's going to happen? How are you going to enforce this?
We have sanctions available to us. The FA's jurisdiction is on the pitch. We feel that clubs are breaching protocols, then we can take action. So sanctions are available, but I hope they won't be needed.
But many are sceptical. England's record goal scorer Wayne Rooney, who today was appointed Derby County's new manager, says enforcing such rules will not be straightforward.
There's many people losing their lives from this disease, so if I'll give the message to the players to obviously be aware of the goal celebrations, but on the other hand, we'll understand if players do hug each other, because I know what it's like when you score a goal. A lot of the time your mind goes blank.
Are we taking the fun out of the game by asking players not to celebrate together as they always have?
This isn't forever. This is hopefully into the end of this season. And I think under the circumstances we can make those small adjustments, get to the end of the season, and then hopefully things will return to normal.
With a host of matches already postponed, the main goal is to complete the season, and how players celebrate after scoring could now be decisive. Dan Roan, BBC News.
And that's it from us now on BBC One The News, where you are. Good night.